My name is Sydney. I am 27 years old, and the divorce papers in my hand felt surprisingly light. I looked up at my soon-to-be ex-husband, gripping the pen, as if he were signing a peace treaty, completely unaware that he had just handed me the detonator. Beside him, his 23-year-old mistress stroked the arm of my custom Italian leather sofa, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of moving into my $2 million mansion. I am taking everything that belongs to me, I said evenly, fighting the urge to smile. She smirked, thinking I meant my clothes and a few photo albums. She had no idea what tomorrow had in store. Empty houses tell no lies. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever let an arrogant person dig their own grave while you quietly held the shovel. Tristan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest with the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had just won the lottery. "You need to be out by Saturday morning," he declared, his voice echoing slightly in the grand living room we had shared for 4 years. "I have a very important engagement and housewarming party to host, and frankly, having my ex-wife lingering around is going to kill the vibe." Lexi giggled, tossing her bleached hair over her shoulder. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple jeans. "Do not worry about taking the big stuff, Sydney," she said. "I am going to replace this dusty old sofa anyway. It does not fit my aesthetic. Plus, Tristan is buying me that velvet sectional I saw on Instagram." I kept my face perfectly neutral, letting my eyes sweep across the expansive room. Every velvet throw pillow, every curated contemporary art piece on the walls was meticulously chosen by me. Tristan snorted, misinterpreting my deliberate silence for despair. "Look, do not make this harder than it has to be. I am the sole provider here. I am the one who pays the rent on this corporate lease month after month. You have been playing around with your freelance cushion fluffing gig for years, making peanuts. It is time to enter the real world." His words were a familiar, exhausting poison. For our entire marriage, Tristan had lorded his middle management corporate salary over me. He genuinely believed that because he transferred his share of the housing costs to a management portal every single month, he was the unquestioned king of the castle. He loved belittling my luxury home staging business to anyone who would listen, telling his golf buddies I was basically a glorified maid who rearranged vases. I never corrected him. I never mentioned that the management portal he paid his rent to was a blind trust completely controlled by me. I never told him that every single piece of furniture in this house, right down to the gold-plated cabinet handles, belonged to my multi-million-dollar company inventory. "You can pack up your clothes, your little makeup bags, and whatever cheap junk you brought into this relationship," Tristan continued, standing up to assert his physical dominance in the room. "But the house stays with the leaseholder, and that is me." I picked up the signed divorce papers and slid them neatly into my leather portfolio. "Fair enough," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly submissive and quiet. "Speaking of money to start over, I checked our joint savings account this morning. The $40,000 we saved together over the last 3 years is gone." Tristan did not even have the decency to look slightly ashamed. Lexi beamed with pride, holding up a set of shiny new car keys adorned with a fluffy pink keychain. "He bought me a Range Rover," she announced, proudly shaking the keys so they jingled loudly. "A housewarming gift for the new lady of the house." Tristan puffed out his chest, stepping closer to me. "Let us be completely real right now, Sydney. That was my money. You contributed absolute pennies from your little decorating hobby. I am the one grinding at the office 50 hours a week, dealing with real stress. Consider the 40 grand my severance package to myself for putting up with you. My lawyer said you could try to fight for half, but by the time we go through the court system, the legal fees will eat it all up anyway. Be smart, take your loss, and walk away quietly." I stared at the man I had pledged my life to, analyzing his pure arrogance. He had drained our joint account, the exact account I had generously let him build his fragile ego with to buy his young mistress a luxury vehicle. He honestly thought he had outsmarted me in every possible category. He thought he had left me totally destitute, financially humiliated, and homeless. The sheer audacity of his financial theft was the final nail in his coffin. He wanted to play hardball with the family finances, completely ignorant of the fact that I held the literal title to the very ground he was standing on. I did not scream at him. I did not throw a glass at his head or lunge to pull Lexi by her expensive hair extensions. Instead, I calmly reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my administrative smart home application. With two silent taps on the glass screen, I permanently revoked Tristan from the master control network. His digital access to the climate control, the security cameras, and the electronic locks was instantly wiped clean. "Enjoy the new car," I said softly. Before Tristan could formulate a response to my eerie calmness, the heavy brass doorbell echoed loudly through the grand foyer. Right on cue, it was Karen, my bitter mother-in-law, arriving to inspect her son's new prize and twist the knife a little deeper into my back. Karen pushed the heavy oak front door open without waiting for anyone to answer her ring. She marched into the foyer, her heels clicking aggressively against the imported hardwood floors. She did not look at me. She did not even acknowledge my existence. Instead, she made a direct line for Tristan, wrapping him in a dramatic, suffocating hug before turning her bright, predatory smile toward Lexi. "Oh, Tristan, darling, the energy in this house feels so much lighter already," Karen declared, her voice carrying that fake aristocratic lilt she always adopted when trying to sound important. "And Lexi, look at you. You are positively glowing. You are exactly the kind of vibrant young woman my son deserves, not someone who just drags him down with her mediocrity." She finally let her eyes slide over to me, offering a look of utter disgust. "I see you are still standing here, Sydney. I assumed you would have packed your little bags and called a budget cab by now." "I am taking my time to ensure I leave with exactly what is mine, Karen," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. Karen scoffed, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "What could possibly be yours in this gorgeous house? Tristan bought everything you see here. He is the one with the real corporate career. You are just a gold digger who got lucky for 4 years. In fact, I am here to make sure you do not try to sneak anything valuable out in your cheap duffel bags. I know how people from your background behave when they get desperate." She began pacing around the open concept living and dining area, running her manicured fingers over the furniture like a vulture picking over a carcass. She stopped at the massive 12-seater solid mahogany dining table. "I remember when my son picked this out," she lied, smoothly tracing the edge of the wood. "It is a stunning piece of craftsmanship. Tristan, you must keep this exactly where it is. It will be perfect for hosting my country club bridge group next month. Lexi, you do not mind if I host my friends here, do you?" "Of course not, Karen," Lexi chirped excitedly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "What is his is mine, and our beautiful home is your home." Karen beamed and strutted into the chef's kitchen. She immediately laid her hands on my absolute prized possession. It was a $4,000 Italian dual-boiler espresso machine, custom-ordered and imported straight from Milan. I had purchased it through my company accounts for a high-end penthouse staging gig and ended up bringing it home because I loved the aesthetic and the brew it produced. "I am taking this coffee maker, though," Karen announced aggressively, patting the gleaming chrome finish. "I have always wanted a professional machine in my own kitchen, and heaven knows you do not need it, Sydney. What are you going to do with a $4,000 espresso machine in whatever tiny studio apartment you end up renting? You probably cannot even afford the imported beans to put inside it anymore. Tristan paid for this roof over your head. He paid for this luxury lifestyle while you pretended to run a business. The least you can do is leave the high-end appliances to the family who actually supported you." I leaned against the kitchen island, crossing my ankles. It was taking every ounce of my willpower not to burst into hysterical laughter right then and there. Karen had always despised me because I did not come from an old money trust fund background. From the very day Tristan introduced us, she made sure to constantly remind me of my modest upbringing. She loved to tell her wealthy friends that her son had done a charity act by marrying a girl whose parents rented a small duplex in the suburbs. She genuinely believed Tristan had rescued me from a life of poverty, and that my staging business was just a silly little hobby to keep me busy while he did the real heavy lifting in the world. "You are absolutely right, Karen," I said, my voice dripping with an icy calmness that made Tristan narrow his eyes suspiciously. "I will not take the espresso machine to a tiny apartment. I will leave it exactly where it belongs." "Good," Karen snapped, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. Because you contributed absolutely nothing to this household. You just rode my son's coattails enjoying the perks of his hard work. Oh, and before I forget, do not even think about showing up to the family Thanksgiving dinner next month. Tristan shifted uncomfortably for a second, but quickly regained his arrogant posture, puffing his chest out. Mom is right, Sydney. It would be highly inappropriate for you to be there. Karen smiled a tight, cruel smile. I have already ordered a custom organic turkey from the high-end butcher downtown, and Lexi is going to help me bake the traditional pecan pies. We are having a real family holiday this year. We do not need the awkwardness of a bitter ex-wife sitting at the table pretending she still belongs with us. You are completely uninvited, Sydney. I expect you to lose my number and never contact any of us again once you finally walk out that door. I promise you, Karen, I replied, looking directly into her cold, judgmental eyes. After this weekend, you will never have to worry about me sitting at your table ever again. And I guarantee this upcoming holiday is going to be an unforgettable experience for your entire family. Karen let out a sharp, condescending laugh. Is that supposed to be a threat? Please, you have zero leverage, zero real assets, and clearly zero class. Just then, a chorus of high-pitched squeals erupted from the second-floor staircase, interrupting our tense standoff. Lexi, who had slipped away upstairs during my confrontation with Karen, was practically skipping down the wooden steps. Behind her trailed three of her closest friends, all of them holding bright yellow industrial measuring tapes and carrying oversized designer tote bags. They giggled loudly as they paraded into the living room, completely ignoring my presence, as if I were a ghost haunting my own house. Lexi clapped her hands together, her eyes sparkling with malicious excitement as she looked across the room at Tristan. Babe, the guest room upstairs with the private balcony is absolutely perfect, Lexi squealed, running over to throw her arms around Tristan's neck and kissing him on the cheek. My girls and I just measured the walls and the windows. We are going to rip out all of Sydney's boring gray wallpaper today. It is going to be the absolute perfect size for the new nursery. The three women behind Lexi pushed past me as if I were a piece of invisible furniture. One of them, holding a designer handbag, shoved her empty iced coffee cup directly into my hands without even looking at my face. "Throw this away from me, would you?" she mumbled, already distracted by the massive open layout of the living room. Lexi did not correct her friend. In fact, she looked completely delighted. "Oh, grab us some sparkling water while you are at it, Sydney," Lexi ordered, waving her hand dismissively toward the kitchen refrigerator. "We have a lot of planning to do, and we need to stay hydrated." I stood holding the sweaty plastic cup, looking at the four of them, completely invading my space. Karen watched from the dining area, sipping water and smiling approvingly at the disrespect. I calmly walked over to the trash can, dropped the cup inside, and leaned against the granite counter, choosing to observe rather than react. "This Saturday is going to be absolutely legendary," Lexi squealed, practically bouncing on her heels. "We are combining the engagement announcement with the housewarming party. Tristan said we can invite up to 50 people. We need to hire a catering team, maybe get that sushi chef from downtown, and we definitely need a massive balloon arch right over the entryway. A balloon arch in my $2 million mansion." The sheer tackiness of the idea almost made me cringe visibly, but I kept my expression completely blank. One of Lexi's friends pulled out a tablet and started aggressively tapping the screen. "We should move this entire sofa set out to the patio for the party," she suggested, pointing at my pristine Italian leather seating arrangement. "It will give us a huge dance floor right here in the center of the room. Plus, if someone spills a drink on it, who cares, right? It is getting replaced anyway." Lexi clapped her hands in agreement. "Exactly." Tristan promised we could overhaul the entire aesthetic. "We are going to burn some sage to get rid of the bad energy and then bring in my interior designer on Monday. I want everything bright white and gold." They continued to loudly map out their destructive redesign, completely erasing my presence from the room. They treated me like the hired help standing quietly by, waiting for instructions. Tristan puffed his chest out, looking at Lexi with pure adoration. "Whatever you want, babe," he said smoothly. "This is your home now. I want you to have the perfect party this Saturday. Just make sure the guest list is finalized tonight so I can notify the neighborhood security gate." Lexi nodded enthusiastically, walking over to the marble island where an expensive bottle of red wine was sitting. It was a vintage Cabernet I had brought back from a business trip to Napa Valley. Without asking, she grabbed the corkscrew and aggressively popped the bottle, pouring herself a generous glass to celebrate. Lexi took a deep gulp of the expensive wine, completely oblivious to its complex notes. She carried the glass by the rim, walking unsteadily toward the center of the living room. She stepped directly onto my antique Persian silk rug. It was a hand-woven masterpiece I had sourced directly from an artisan auction valued at exactly $15,000. The intricate silver and navy threads caught the afternoon sunlight, shimmering beautifully against the dark hardwood floors. Lexi stopped dead center on the rug. She looked down at the delicate silk fibers, and then looked right up into my eyes. A malicious smirk spread across her perfectly glossed lips. She tilted her wrist just a fraction of an inch. The crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the hardwood right at the edge of the rug, sending a violent splash of dark crimson wine directly across the pristine silver silk. The stain bloomed instantly, soaking deep into the delicate threads, ruining the priceless antique in a matter of seconds. "Oh no," Lexi gasped, placing a dramatic hand over her chest, her tone dripping with fake innocence. "I am so clumsy today. My fingers just slipped." Her friends erupted into giggles, covering their mouths. Karen let out a sharp sigh of annoyance but did not reprimand her future daughter-in-law. Tristan just shook his head, chuckling softly like it was a cute mistake made by a clumsy child. "Oops," Lexi said, stepping back from the expanding red puddle. "Do not cry over it, Sydney. Tell Tristan to buy you a cheap Walmart rug for your new apartment. I am sure it will match whatever discount furniture you can afford now." I looked at the ruined silk. My heart beat steady and calm. I did not yell. I did not lunge at her throat. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera application. I stepped forward, ignoring Lexi's confused stare, and stood over the stain. I snapped 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of the ruined $15,000 rug, the shattered glass, and the sprawling red wine puddle. The camera flash blinked brightly in the sunlit room. "What are you doing?" Lexi demanded, her smug smile faltering for a split second. "Taking pictures for your little scrapbook so you can remember what living in luxury felt like." "Just documenting the damage for the final invoice," I said quietly, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Tristan rolled his eyes, stepping forward to pull Lexi into a protective hug. "Ignore her, Lexi. She is just trying to make you feel bad. Leave the mess, Sydney can clean it up before she packs her bags." Before I could respond, a deep, authoritative voice echoed from the front doorway, instantly silencing the giggles of Lexi's friends. "Nobody is cleaning anything up just yet." We all turned toward the entrance. It was Jamal, my brother-in-law. Standing at 6'2" in a sharp-tailored suit, he commanded the room immediately. Unlike the rest of the family, Jamal actually worked for a living. As a highly sought-after property appraiser, he had an eye for detail that bordered on terrifying. Brittany, his wife, was trailing closely behind him, but Jamal had already stopped dead in his tracks. His sharp dark eyes were fixed on the floor. He was not looking at the spilled wine. He was staring directly at the flipped-up corner of the Persian silk rug, where a tiny metallic asset tag was now clearly visible. Jamal stepped fully into the foyer, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a soft thud that somehow managed to command the attention of the entire room. He did not say a word at first. His sharp, dark eyes remained locked on the small metallic asset tag, peeking out from beneath the flipped edge of the Persian silk rug. While Lexi and her friends giggled over the spilled wine, Jamal analyzed the situation with the cold, calculated precision of a man who evaluated luxury real estate for a living. Brittany pushed past him, completely oblivious to the heavy tension thick in the air. "Oh my goodness, Tristan," she squealed, running over to give her brother a tight hug. "This house is absolutely incredible. I cannot believe I have never been over here before." Brittany was exactly like the rest of her family, loud, easily impressed by superficial wealth, and entirely willing to overlook my existence. She kissed Karen on the cheek and then turned to Lexi. "And you must be Lexi. Oh, you are so pretty. I absolutely love that top." As the women exchanged shallow compliments, Jamal walked slowly toward the center of the living room. He crouched down near the massive red wine stain, but he was not looking at the ruined silk. He reached out with one long finger and gently pushed the edge of the rug up just a fraction of an inch more. He studied the alphanumeric barcode and the faint laser-etched logo on the metallic tag. In his line of work, appraising high-end commercial and residential properties across the state, he saw these tags every single day. They were industrial tracking codes used exclusively by elite corporate staging firms to monitor millions of dollars in inventory. Jamal slowly stood up, smoothing the front of his tailored suit jacket. He looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. He knew. It took him less than 30 seconds in my house to piece together the entire puzzle. He recognized the quality of the furniture, he recognized the staging tags, and he recognized the absolute absurdity of a mid-level corporate manager like Tristan affording a custom-curated $2 million interior. I held his gaze for a brief second and gave him a microscopic shake of my head. Do not tell them. Let them burn. Jamal let a tiny knowing smirk touch the corner of his mouth before he completely erased it. He turned his attention to Tristan, who was currently boasting to Lexi's friends about the property taxes he supposedly paid. Tristan, we need to talk for a second, Jamal said, his deep voice cutting through the high-pitched chatter. Tristan sighed loudly, clearly annoyed at being interrupted during his grandstanding. What is it, Jamal? I am kind of busy hosting right now. Jamal did not raise his voice, but his tone was deadly serious. Over here, just you and me. Tristan rolled his eyes and swaggered over to the edge of the kitchen island away from the women. What is your problem, man? Tristan muttered, crossing his arms defensively. You just walked in and you are already killing the mood. Jamal leaned in close, keeping his voice low enough that Karen and Brittany could not hear. I am only going to ask you this once, Tristan. Who actually owns the furniture in this house? Because I recognize those metallic tags on the underside of that rug, and I can guarantee you there are matching tags under this marble console and that Italian leather sofa. Those are corporate staging asset tags. You do not own any of this stuff, do you? Tristan's face flushed a deep, angry red. His fragile ego instantly felt threatened by a man who was significantly smarter and more successful than him. He puffed out his chest, trying to physically intimidate Jamal, which was a laughable effort. Mind your own business, Jamal, Tristan hissed, venom dripping from his voice. Do not come into my house and try to play ghetto lawyer with me just because you value a few buildings downtown. Jamal did not even flinch at the racial insult. He just stared at Tristan with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. I am trying to warn you, man, Jamal said, his voice cold as ice. I evaluate multi-million-dollar estates for a living. That rug Lexi just destroyed is a hand-knotted Persian silk masterpiece. If it belongs to a commercial leasing company, they will sue you for the full replacement cost. You are standing in a house full of staged corporate property, and you are letting your clueless mistress throw red wine all over it. I have a sweetheart, corporate lease negotiated by a very close buddy. Tristan lied through his teeth, his arrogance blinding him to reality. I pay the rent every month, so I make the rules. It is my house. I can burn that rug in the backyard if I want to. Now back off and let me enjoy my weekend before I kick you out of my house too. Jamal held his hands up in mock surrender, taking a step back. All right, man. It is your funeral. Do not say I did not warn you. Jamal walked away from Tristan and leaned against the far wall, crossing his arms. He looked at me again, and this time the amusement in his eyes was unmistakable. He was strapping in for the show. Tristan, feeling the need to reassert his dominance after being questioned, marched back to the center of the living room. He clapped his hands together loudly, drawing everyone's attention. All right, Sydney's show is over, Tristan announced, pointing a harsh finger toward the front door. You have packed your little bags, and you have taken your pictures. I want you gone. You have exactly 48 hours to remove yourself from my property. Lexi leaned against Tristan's shoulder, smiling maliciously. Yeah, Sydney, we have a lot of redecorating to do. Tristan checked the expensive watch on his wrist, a watch he had bought using our joint credit card. Be out by Saturday morning, Sydney. My VIP party is at 7 p.m., and I want this place completely sanitized of your presence before my guests arrive. I do not want to see a single trace of you when I walk through that door. I slid my phone back into my pocket, picking up my single cheap duffel bag from the floor. I looked around the beautifully curated living room, admiring the lighting, the textures, and the absolute perfection of my work. Then I looked right at Tristan, offering him the brightest, most genuine smile I had given him in years. "Oh, do not worry, Tristan," I said, my voice echoing softly in the grand foyer. "I will be gone, and I will make sure there is absolutely no trace of me left behind." I turned on my heel and walked up the sweeping glass staircase. Lexi and her friends were still gathered in the living room, whispering and snickering, but their voices faded as I reached the master suite. I pulled a battered canvas duffel bag from the back of the walk-in closet. It was the same faded bag I had moved in with 4 years ago. I wanted Tristan to see it. I wanted him to savor the visual of his broken, defeated wife slinking away into the night with nothing to her name. I packed only the absolute bare minimum. A few pairs of jeans, some plain t-shirts, my toothbrush, and my laptop. I deliberately left my designer dresses, my expensive jewelry, and my high-end skincare products sitting right on the vanity. Taking them would ruin the illusion I was carefully constructing. When I came back downstairs 10 minutes later with the duffel bag slung over my shoulder, Tristan was leaning casually against the front door. He had his arms crossed, looking like a victorious king, banishing a peasant from his kingdom. Lexi stood beside him, holding her new car keys, practically vibrating with excitement at the sight of my departure. "Is that it?" Tristan asked, a cruel smirk playing on his lips as he eyed my single bag. 4 years of marriage, and that is all you have to show for it. I thought you would at least try to beg for a few more days." "It is all I need right now," I replied, keeping my voice soft and deliberately meek. "Good. Remember, I want you completely out by Saturday morning. And leave the garage opener on the kitchen counter," he ordered, stepping aside just enough to let me squeeze past him. "Enjoy whatever budget motel you can afford on your cushion fluffer salary, Sydney. Try not to call me crying when you realize how expensive the real world is." I walked out the heavy oak door without looking back. The lock clicked shut behind me, echoing loudly in the quiet suburban air. I walked down the long driveway, got into my modest sedan, and drove away. But I did not go to a cheap motel to cry myself to sleep. I drove straight downtown, navigating through the bustling traffic until I pulled into the private underground parking garage of a sleek high-rise commercial building. I parked in the spot marked Chief Executive Officer. I took the private secure elevator up to the top floor, stepping out into the sprawling glass-walled headquarters of my company. My executive assistant handed me a fresh espresso as I walked toward my corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the entire city skyline. It was finally time to pull back the curtain on the grand illusion I had painstakingly maintained for my entire marriage. Tristan thought he was a financial genius. When we were house hunting 2 years ago, he insisted he had to be the one to provide for us. His ego was far too fragile to accept any real help from what he constantly referred to as my little decorating gig. So I let him play the provider. I had quietly reached out to my corporate attorneys and set up an irrevocable blind trust. Through that exact trust, I purchased the $2 million mansion completely in cash. My cash. Money I had earned from staging multi-million-dollar estates, high-end commercial properties, and luxury penthouses across the entire state. Then I had my property management firm draft a fake corporate lease specifically for Tristan. He signed it eagerly, bragging to his family and friends about the amazing deal his corporate buddies got him. For 2 years, he diligently paid what he thought was rent. In reality, his monthly payments exactly covered the neighborhood homeowners association fees and the annual property taxes. He was essentially living in a luxury estate for absolute pennies, all while acting like he was my savior and primary provider. He treated me like a parasite while I was silently subsidizing his entire existence. But the house itself was just the beginning of the trap. The real payload was the interior. Because I owned a premier luxury home staging company, my regional warehouses were filled with millions of dollars in high-end furniture, art, and appliances. I had fully staged our home using my company's premium inventory to test out new aesthetic concepts. Every velvet sofa, every silk rug, every smart home appliance, right down to the custom blinds and the imported trash cans, legally belonged to my corporation. All of it was meticulously cataloged, barcoded, and insured under my business tax identification number. Tristan had demanded I leave the house and take only my personal belongings. He told me to my face that the house and everything in it belonged to the leaseholder. He was legally right, just not in the way he thought. He had absolutely no idea that his name was nowhere on the property deed or the asset manifests. I sat down at my massive mahogany desk, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls around me. I opened my laptop and securely logged into my corporate server. I pulled up the digital inventory manifest for the mansion. 342 individual items totaling over $400,000 in staging assets. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct line to my warehouse logistics foreman. He answered on the second ring. "David," I said, my voice crisp and commanding, "I need you to completely clear my Saturday morning schedule, cancel any pending deliveries, and push all non-essential meetings to next week." "Done," David replied instantly, the sound of warehouse machinery humming in the background of the call. "What is the job, boss?" "I need the fleet," I said, my eyes scanning the list of custom kitchen appliances Tristan loved to show off to his guests. "Get 3 of our largest box trucks prepped, fueled, and ready to roll by dawn. Assemble a crew of 15 of our absolute best movers. We are doing a total extraction down to the drywall at the suburban estate." "A total extraction?" David asked, sounding surprised. "You mean taking everything?" "I mean taking every single item that belongs to this company," I confirmed, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. "We are taking the beds, the artwork, the televisions, and the patio furniture. We are unbolting the smart fridge and the washer. I want a house completely stripped to its bare bones, and we only have a 4-hour window to do it while the occupants are out. Do you understand?" "Loud and clear, boss," David said. "We will be ready." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my leather chair, taking a slow sip of my espresso. Tristan wanted me out by Saturday morning so he could host his grand housewarming party with his new mistress. I was simply going to grant his wish and give him the exact empty house he legally deserved. By Friday night, I was comfortably settled into the plush velvet sofa of my temporary downtown penthouse suite. I poured myself a generous glass of expensive Cabernet and opened my laptop. I did not need to hire a private investigator to see what Tristan and Lexi were up to. Lexi possessed the kind of rampant narcissism that required constant public validation. All I had to do was open TikTok and search her public username. Sure enough, she had just uploaded a brand new 10-minute house tour video. It already had 50,000 views. The caption read, "Moving into my dream mansion with my dream man." I hit play. Lexi appeared on screen, wearing a designer silk robe that I had actually bought for myself 2 Christmases ago. She twirled in the grand foyer, the massive imported crystal chandelier glittering behind her. "Welcome to my new humble abode," she squealed to her followers, blowing a kiss to the camera. "My amazing boyfriend just gave me the keys to this $2 million estate. Let me show you guys how we live." For the next 8 minutes, I watched Lexi parade through my house, claiming my hard work as her own personal fairy tale. She dragged the camera into the chef's kitchen. She tapped the screen of the $12,000 smart fridge, loudly bragging about how Tristan had it custom ordered just for her so she could sync her grocery list to her phone. She walked into the dining room, pointing the lens at the heavy mahogany table and the custom woven linen curtains that cascaded from the ceiling to the floor. "I literally told Tristan I wanted a modern royal aesthetic and he delivered," she lied smoothly, posing against the doorframe. "We are going to replace some of this old stuff soon, but for now it is a total vibe." She even took her followers upstairs to the master suite. She threw herself onto the massive California king bed, giggling as she rolled across the Egyptian cotton duvet cover. The mattress alone cost more than her new car, but she just kicked her bare feet in the air and told her audience about her upcoming housewarming party. "We are hosting 50 VIP guests tomorrow night," she announced, her eyes wide with manufactured excitement. "It is going to be the party of the century. Make sure to tune into my live stream." I took one final sip of my wine and closed the application. She was absolutely right. It was going to be the party of the century. I did not feel angry watching her. I felt an overwhelming sense of clinical satisfaction. Her viral video was not an insult, it was a perfectly time-stamped high-definition reconnaissance mission. I paused the video at various intervals, cross-referencing the items she showed with my corporate digital inventory manifest. The smart fridge check. The dining table check. The custom curtains check. She was unwittingly proving to me that Tristan had not moved a single piece of my corporate property out of the house. Everything was sitting exactly where I left it, ripe for the taking. Lexi was practically doing my inventory audit for me. I set my wine glass down and switched tabs on my web browser, opening my secure legal portal. It was time to draft the final paperwork. My company did not just lease properties without ironclad contracts. I pulled up the original lease agreement Tristan had signed 2 years ago. I navigated to the breach of contract clause. Under the strict terms of the blind trust, any illegal activity, including financial theft or the unauthorized destruction of property on the premises, resulted in an immediate forfeiture of the lease. I began typing out the formal lease termination notice. I stated clearly that due to the unauthorized dissipation of $40,000 in marital assets and the intentional destruction of property, the lease was officially terminated. I gave him a legally binding notice of 0 days to vacate, as the property was being reclaimed by the corporate entity immediately. I printed the document on thick, heavy watermarked corporate letterhead. It looked incredibly intimidating. Next, I generated the invoice for the damaged Persian silk rug. I attached the high-resolution photographs I had taken of Lexi, spilling the wine along with the original auction receipt for $15,000. I added a standard damage fee, bringing the total to $17,500. I printed this out as well and placed both documents into a sleek black leather presentation folder. Tristan always respected corporate authority. He was about to get a massive dose of it. The trap was fully set. I placed the black folder into my purse and set my alarm for 4 in the morning. Dawn broke on Saturday morning, painting the sky pale pink. I was parked exactly 3 blocks away from the estate, sitting quietly inside my tinted black SUV. At exactly 8 o'clock, the garage door of the mansion slowly rolled open. Tristan pulled out in the brand-new Range Rover he had bought Lexi using our stolen savings. Lexi was sitting in the passenger seat wearing an oversized pair of designer sunglasses. They were heading out for their scheduled couples spa day to relax before their massive VIP housewarming party. They looked completely carefree, without a single worry in the world. I watched their vehicle turn the corner and disappear down the tree-lined avenue. I picked up my two-way radio, pressing the transmission button. "The targets are clear," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Move in." Less than a minute later, the quiet morning silence of the upscale neighborhood was broken by the deep rumbling roar of heavy diesel engines. I watched in the rear-view mirror as 3 massive, 26-foot commercial moving trucks, painted entirely in matte black, turned onto the street. They moved in a synchronized line, dominating the road. The lead truck slowly backed up, its reverse alarm echoing loudly through the neighborhood before it parked directly in Tristan's driveway. The extraction of my property had officially begun. I stepped out of my SUV, buttoning my blazer as the lead truck cut its engine. The hydraulic lift gates of all 3 trucks hissed open simultaneously, hitting the pavement with heavy thuds. David, my logistics foreman, jumped out of the cab, wearing his signature high-visibility vest and holding a heavy-duty electronic clipboard. Behind him, a highly trained crew of 15 professional movers poured out of the vehicles. They were all wearing the crisp black uniforms of my company, moving with the synchronized efficiency of a military tactical unit. There was no casual chatting and no wasted movements. Every man knew exactly what was at stake and how tight our timeline was. I walked up the driveway, my tablet in hand. I did not need a physical key to enter the house. Despite Tristan proudly declaring himself the king of the castle, the electronic deadbolt on the front door was hardwired into my master staging account. I tapped my screen, bypassing his amateur security protocols, and the heavy oak door clicked open with a satisfying mechanical snap. I stepped into the grand foyer, the crew filing in silently behind me. "Listen up, everyone," I announced, projecting my voice clearly across the expansive space. "We have a hard 4-hour window before the occupants return from their spa day. This is a total corporate extraction protocol. Every single item carrying our company barcode leaves this premises today. I want 0 property damage to the drywall or the hardwood floors, but I want this place stripped down to the absolute bare studs. David will be scanning items out at the front door to update the server. Let us move." The crew scattered instantly, dividing into predetermined strike teams. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of aggressive logistics. Two men descended on the living room dragging heavy-duty padded moving blankets. They tipped the custom Italian leather sofa back, wrapping it tight in thick plastic shrink wrap. The sound of industrial tape tearing off the roll echoed sharply against the high ceilings. Another team went straight for the ruined Persian silk rug. They rolled it up carefully, making sure to scan the corporate asset tag, and loaded it onto a steel dolly. It was not just trash to me, it was physical evidence of property damage for the upcoming lawsuit against Tristan and his mistress. Upstairs, a crew of 4 dismantled the massive master suite. They did not just take the heavy oak bed frame, they stripped the mattress, the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets, the down comforter, and the silk throw pillows. Lexi had already unpacked her cheap fast fashion clothes into my custom mahogany dressers. I instructed the team to dump her garments directly into black plastic garbage bags and leave them in a pile in the corner. They packed away the matching bedside tables, the designer lamps, and the oversized vanity mirror. When they were finished, the room where Tristan and Lexi slept just hours ago was nothing but an echoing square of empty space. Tristan's home office was next. The heavy executive desk, the ergonomic leather chair, the towering bookshelves, all of it was staging inventory. My team dismantled his entire workspace, leaving his important corporate paperwork and his cheap plastic pens scattered in a pathetic, disorganized pile on the floorboards. Downstairs, men were taking down the massive contemporary canvas paintings, leaving nothing but tiny, microscopic nail holes in the drywall. They boxed up the decorative vases, the crystal decanters, and the heavy coffee table books I had meticulously arranged to make the house look lived in. They moved to the backyard, stacking the woven outdoor patio seating, the heavy gas fire pit, and the expensive poolside loungers. No detail was too small for this extraction. I watched a mover march past me carrying the stainless steel automated trash cans from the bathrooms. Another held a heavy, reinforced box filled with the imported velvet curtains and the heavy brass rods that held them up, leaving the massive floor-to-ceiling windows completely bare and exposed to the street. The house was rapidly losing its soul, bleeding out its luxury item by item, until the walls literally felt bare and cold. Every single piece passed by David at the front door, who scanned the metallic barcodes with a handheld laser device. The scanner emitted a sharp, confirming beep, with every item successfully logging the safe return of my assets to the corporate server. The illusion of Tristan's immense wealth was being systematically dismantled and loaded into the back of my diesel trucks. We were 3 hours into the operation. The living room, dining room, bedrooms, and home office were completely void of life. The sound of footsteps now echoed loudly, bouncing off the bare walls in a way that felt entirely hollow. The massive trucks outside were groaning under the weight of the recovered inventory, their cargo holds packed tight with the remnants of my marriage. David wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and walked over to me where I stood in the middle of the barren, sunlit foyer. He looked around the empty space, nodding in satisfaction at the efficiency of his crew. Then he pointed his electronic scanner toward the chef's kitchen, which remained completely untouched, shining with chrome and stainless steel. "Ms. Sidney, what about the kitchen appliances?" David asked, his deep voice bouncing off the empty walls. "I know they are physically wired and plumbed into the house. Do we leave them here for the property manager?" I slowly turned my head and looked at the massive $12,000 smart fridge, the dual oven, the built-in wine cooler, and the custom espresso machine Karen had aggressively demanded to keep for herself. I thought about Tristan bragging that he was the sole provider. I thought about Lexi making a viral video tapping on the glass of my refrigerator. I turned back to David, my expression completely flat and my voice cold. "It is corporate staging equipment, David," I replied. "Rip it all out." David did not hesitate. He gave a sharp nod and signaled his specialized utility crew. They moved into the chef's kitchen with heavy-duty power drills and wrench sets. I stood by the island and watched as they expertly shut off the main water line and detached the massive $12,000 smart fridge. The very same stainless steel appliance Lexi had been tapping on in her viral video just 12 hours ago was now being strapped to a reinforced steel hand truck. It looked awkwardly massive and entirely out of place as they wheeled it out the front door, leaving a glaring empty alcove in the custom cabinetry. Next came the built-in dual ovens and the under-counter digital wine cooler. The men worked with surgical precision, detaching the units and capping off the exposed electrical wires. They left behind nothing but gaping rectangular holes, exposing the raw, unfinished wood of the cabinet frames. I walked over to the granite counter and personally unplugged the $4,000 Italian dual boiler espresso machine. Karen had aggressively staked her claim on it, demanding I leave it behind so she could show it off to her wealthy country club friends. I carefully packed it into a padded transport crate. I was leaving it exactly where it belonged, which was with me. The utility crew moved rapidly through the rest of the house. They marched into the laundry room and uncoupled the high-capacity smart washer and dryer sets, draining the residual water from the hoses and wheeling the heavy machines down the hallway. Then David issued the order for the micro-extraction. This was the part of the operation that truly stripped a house of its soul. Men with tall stepladders moved systematically through every single room, unscrewing the custom programmable smart bulbs from the ceiling fixtures. They did not replace them with standard bulbs. They left the recessed lighting cans completely dark and empty. In the master bathroom, the crew unbolted the massive anti-fog LED mirrors from the dual vanity walls, exposing the raw, unpainted drywall and the ugly plastic anchor mounts underneath. They unscrewed the brushed nickel towel racks, the designer soap dispensers, and yes, even the heavy metallic toilet paper holders. Tristan had repeatedly told me to my face that everything in the house belonged to him because he paid the rent. He was about to find out the hard way that his rent did not even cover the hardware bolted to the walls. The house was rapidly deteriorating from a luxury architectural showcase into a sterile, unlivable concrete and drywall box. I walked toward the back of the house, sliding open the heavy glass doors that led to the patio. The backyard was expansive, and Tristan loved to host outdoor barbecues out here, loudly bragging to his coworkers about his perfectly manicured lawn. But the lawn was not real grass. It was premium synthetic turf rolled out and staked down by my landscaping staging division to give the property instant, vibrant curb appeal. I pointed to the sprawling green expanse. "Roll it up," I instructed the outdoor crew. 4 men grabbed heavy-duty utility knives and began slicing the thick turf into manageable strips. They ripped the synthetic grass away from the earth, rolling it into massive, heavy cylinders. When they were finished lifting the final roll, the pristine backyard was completely gone. In its place was a barren, uneven plot of hard-packed brown dirt mixed with gravel. The contrast was startling and pathetic. The outdoor gas fire pit was gone. The imported teak wood dining set was gone. The expensive string lights that gave the patio a warm, inviting glow were packed away. The yard now looked like an abandoned commercial construction site. I walked back inside, sliding the glass door shut behind me. The silence in the house was now absolute and deafening. Without the heavy silk rugs, the soft velvet furniture, and the canvas artwork to absorb the sound, every single breath I took echoed sharply against the cold walls. The house was a hollow, cavernous shell. It felt vast, empty, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was a perfect physical representation of Tristan and Lexi's relationship, stripped of all its expensive illusions. David walked up to me, his heavy work boots booming loudly in the empty foyer. "The trucks are fully loaded and secured. Ms. Sidney," he reported, handing me the electronic clipboard to sign off on the extraction. "Every barcoded item has been scanned and accounted for. The inventory is officially out of the building." "Thank you, David," I said, signing my name with my finger on the glowing screen. "Take the fleet back to the main warehouse and have the team unload. I will handle things from here." David gave a respectful nod, turned, and walked out the front door. A minute later, the heavy diesel engines roared to life, and the 3 massive moving trucks rolled out of the driveway, heading back toward the city. The operation was a complete success. I was entirely alone in the $2 million mansion. I took a slow, deliberate walk through the empty rooms, listening to the sharp click of my heels against the bare hardwood. I walked into the massive living room where Lexi had spilled her wine, and Tristan had ordered me to leave with my cheap bags. I walked to the exact dead center of the room. I reached into the small canvas supply bag I had brought with me and pulled out a cheap, flimsy plastic folding table. I snapped the metal aluminum legs open and set it down directly in the middle of the cavernous space. It was the only piece of furniture left in the entire estate. I reached into my purse and pulled out the sleek black leather presentation folder containing the formal lease termination notice and the $17,500 damage invoice. I placed the folder dead center on the cheap plastic table, perfectly aligned. I turned around, walked out the front door, and locked it firmly behind me. At exactly 6:45 that evening, the quiet suburban street was illuminated by the sweeping headlights of a massive black stretch limousine. It was followed closely by a parade of expensive luxury sedans and sleek sports cars. Tristan had spared absolutely no expense for his grand housewarming and engagement celebration, using the last remaining credit limits on his personal cards to rent the extravagant transportation. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted to prove to everyone that he had officially arrived in the upper echelons of society. The limousine came to a smooth stop right at the edge of the driveway. The driver hurried around to open the heavy rear door, and Tristan stepped out first. He was wearing a sharply tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the successful corporate executive he desperately pretended to be. He reached back into the vehicle and helped Lexi step out onto the pavement. She was draped in a sparkling emerald green sequin gown that caught the streetlights glittering brightly as she posed for the small crowd of guests gathering behind them. Over 50 VIP attendees began spilling out of the trailing vehicles. It was a carefully curated guest list designed entirely to stroke Tristan's fragile ego. There were high-level corporate partners, wealthy neighborhood socialites, and of course Karen. My former mother-in-law stepped out of a sleek silver sedan wearing a heavy fur coat despite the mild evening weather. She immediately linked arms with a tall, distinguished older man. This was Mr. Preston, the regional vice president of Tristan's company, and the exact man holding the keys to the massive promotion Tristan had been aggressively chasing for the past 8 months. Karen was already hard at work securing her son's future. "Oh, Richard, you are simply going to love what Tristan has done with the estate," she boasted, her voice carrying loudly over the chatter of the arriving crowd. "He has such an incredible eye for luxury real estate. He completely gutted and redesigned the interior to match his executive lifestyle. It is a true smart home. True smart." Mr. Preston nodded politely, looking up at the imposing facade of the $2 million mansion. The exterior brickwork still looked grand in the evening shadows, hiding the absolute barren wasteland that now existed just beyond the front door. "Impressive property," Mr. Preston noted, adjusting his silk tie. "You must be doing exceptionally well for yourself to manage a lease on an estate of this magnitude. It shows real financial maturity." Tristan beamed, his chest practically inflating with pride. "Thank you, sir," he replied smoothly, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs. "I firmly believe that your environment dictates your success. I wanted a home that reflected my dedication and my vision for the future. Please, everyone, follow me. Let us get this party started." The catering team and the bartenders should already be setting up inside. The crowd murmured in excited anticipation, trailing behind Tristan and Lexi as they walked confidently up the long paved walkway toward the front entrance. Lexi was practically skipping, clinging tightly to Tristan's arm and waving to her friends in the crowd. Tristan approached the heavy oak door and turned back to face his audience, flashing a bright, charismatic smile. "Watch this," Tristan called out, pointing to the sleek digital keypad mounted next to the doorframe. "The entire property is wired into a state-of-the-art biometric and digital security network. The climate control, the lighting, the sound system, all of it activates the second I input my master code. It is completely seamless." Mr. Preston and the rest of the VIP guests watched with polite interest as Tristan confidently pressed his index finger against the glowing glass screen of the keypad. He quickly punched in his 6-digit master access code, expecting the heavy deadbolt to automatically slide open with a welcoming mechanical hum. Instead, the keypad emitted a harsh, high-pitched buzzing sound. The screen flashed a bright, aggressive red, illuminating Tristan's confused face in the dim evening light. "Access." Denied scrolled quickly across the tiny digital display. Lexi pouted, crossing her arms over her sequin gown. "Babe, open the door," she whined, shifting uncomfortably in her high heels. "It is getting chilly out here and my friends are waiting to see the chandelier." "Just a minor glitch," Tristan chuckled nervously, his charismatic smile faltering for a fraction of a second. You know how these advanced smart systems can be sometimes, a little too secure for their own good. Let me just try it one more time. He wiped his finger on his tuxedo pants and aggressively punched the code into the keypad again. The system responded instantly with the same harsh buzzing sound and the glaring red light. Access denied. The crowd behind him fell completely silent. The excited chatter died down, replaced by the awkward shuffling of expensive leather shoes on the concrete walkway. Tristan was visibly sweating now. The confident executive facade was cracking under the weight of 50 expectant stares. Mr. Preston raised a single eyebrow, looking from the blinking red keypad to Tristan's panicked face. Everything all right here, Tristan? The vice president asked, his tone dropping its previously warm cadence. Yes, absolutely, sir. Tristan stammered, his voice pitching up slightly. The network must be doing a routine software update. Good thing I always carry the physical emergency key just in case. Old school reliability, right? He frantically dug his hand into his tuxedo pocket, retrieving a heavy brass key. His hands were shaking slightly as he jammed the key into the mechanical deadbolt, manually forcing the lock mechanism to turn. The heavy oak door gave way with a loud metallic clank. Tristan let out a massive sigh of relief. He pushed the door wide open, stepping dramatically over the threshold and turning back to the crowd with his arms spread wide. "Welcome to our beautiful home," he shouted enthusiastically. But as he turned back around to face the grand foyer, the words completely died in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, his arms slowly dropping to his sides. He was expecting the grand crystal chandelier to automatically flood the room with warm, inviting light. He was expecting the soft sound of jazz music playing through the hidden ceiling speakers. He was expecting the sight of his custom Italian leather sofa and his priceless Persian silk rug. Instead, he was met with a pitch-black, cavernous void. There were no lights, there was no music, there was no catering team setting up appetizers on the granite island. The air inside the house felt freezing cold and entirely dead. Tristan took one hesitant step forward into the darkness and gasped. The sound of his own terrified breath echoed violently, bouncing off the bare drywall and the empty floorboards, ringing loudly in the absolute silence of the hollow mansion. Tristan stood paralyzed in the doorway as the chilling reality of the empty house washed over him. The VIP guests crowding the front steps behind him began to murmur in confusion, shifting uncomfortably in the crisp evening air. Mr. Preston cleared his throat loudly, asking if there was a power outage. A few younger guests pulled out their smartphones, activating their flashlights. Beams of harsh white LED light pierced the thick darkness, sweeping across the foyer and into the grand living room. The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. The beams of light illuminated absolute desolation. The imported crystal chandelier was gone, replaced by bare electrical wires hanging sadly from the high ceiling. The Italian leather sofa, the mahogany dining table, the priceless artwork, everything had vanished without a trace. Even the custom-woven window treatments were missing, leaving the massive glass panes completely bare and exposing the hollow interior to the street. One guest aimed their flashlight toward the guest bathroom near the entrance. The door was wide open, revealing raw drywall and protruding plumbing pipes where the luxury vanity and the toilet used to be. The house had been surgically gutted down to the studs. Lexi shoved her way past Tristan, her face illuminated by the bright glow of her own phone screen. She stumbled into the house, her high heels clacking violently against the cold, bare hardwood floors. She ran frantically into the kitchen, swinging her light around the space. The gaping hole where the $12,000 smart fridge had been seemed to mock her. The expensive dual ovens were gone. She let out a high-pitched shriek of horror and sprinted toward the back patio, sliding the heavy glass door open on its tracks. Lexi rushed outside, expecting to find the perfectly manicured synthetic turf and the warm glow of the fire pit where she planned to host the cocktail hour. Instead, her stiletto heel sank instantly into loose gravel and damp brown dirt. She lost her balance and collapsed hard onto her knees, her expensive emerald green sequin gown instantly soaking up the mud. She slammed her fists against the dirt, screaming at the top of her lungs. "My aesthetic," she wailed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "My dream house is ruined. Everything is ruined. I cannot film my live stream in a dirt pit. This is a complete disaster. The sound of Lexi sobbing in the mud finally snapped Tristan out of his frozen stupor. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He stormed into the center of the living room, his perfectly tailored tuxedo looking completely absurd against the backdrop of the hollow-gutted estate. Just outside the front door, the catering team had arrived, holding massive silver trays of expensive sushi. But they froze on the porch, realizing there were no tables, no counters, and no power to serve the food. Karen pushed her way to the front of the crowd, clutching her heavy fur coat tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted wildly around the empty space before landing on her son. "Tristan, what is the meaning of this?" Karen shrieked, her aristocratic facade crumbling instantly. "Where is the furniture? Where is my espresso machine?" She looked around the empty room, and the realization hit her like a freight train. It was Sydney, she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the bare walls. "That vicious, ungrateful gold digger. I knew she was from a bad neighborhood. She is a master thief. She packed up the entire house while you were at the spa." The VIP guests whispered loudly among themselves, stepping back toward the driveway to distance themselves from the unfolding domestic nightmare. Several of them were already pulling out their phones to request rides back to the city, wanting no part of this chaotic scene. Mr. Preston did not step back. The regional vice president walked slowly into the empty foyer, shining his flashlight around the stripped walls with a look of profound disgust. He stopped when his light caught the only item left in the entire house, the cheap plastic folding table sitting dead center in the living room with a single black leather folder resting on top of it. Mr. Preston turned his flashlight directly onto Tristan's sweating, panicked face. The older man did not look angry. He looked deeply disappointed, which was infinitely worse for Tristan's career. "You invited 50 of the most influential people in our corporate network to a gutted house, Tristan," Mr. Preston said, his voice dangerously low and steady. "You stood on that driveway and bragged about your financial maturity and your executive lifestyle. Yet you clearly do not even have basic control over your own domestic affairs." Tristan held his hands up desperately, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. "Sir, please, you have to understand." Tristan pleaded, his voice trembling with panic. "My ex-wife is insane. She must have hired a criminal crew to rob me blind today. I had no idea this was going to happen. I am the victim here. I will fix this immediately." Mr. Preston shook his head slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. "A man who cannot anticipate and manage a crisis in his own home is not a man I can trust to manage a regional sales division," Mr. Preston stated coldly. "You lack judgment, Tristan. You lack foresight. And frankly, this entire display is highly embarrassing for the firm. I suggest you get your life together." Mr. Preston turned his back on Tristan and walked out the front door, signaling for his driver to pull the car around. Tristan watched his boss and his impending promotion walk away into the night. His chest heaved with heavy, erratic breaths. He was utterly humiliated, stripped of his pride, his wealth, and his professional future in front of his peers. He needed someone to blame. He needed to destroy the person who had done this to him. His hands shaking with fury, he pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He punched the emergency numbers into his screen, his thumb striking the glass with violent force. He held the phone to his ear, his eyes locked onto the black leather folder sitting on the cheap plastic table. The operator answered immediately, asking for the nature of his emergency. Tristan gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "My psychotic ex-wife just robbed me of $1 million in assets," Tristan screamed into the receiver, his voice echoing off the bare drywall. "Send the police now." I watched the entire pathetic meltdown unfold in high definition from the safety of my SUV parked down the street. Before I locked the front door, I had wedged a tiny battery-powered security camera into the upper molding of the foyer, strictly to monitor my property. The live feed transmitted directly to my tablet, and the audio was crystal clear. Tristan lowered his phone after demanding the police, showing a wild, desperate look in his eyes. He turned back to the crowd of VIP guests standing awkwardly on the front porch. "Please, everyone, just stay right here," Tristan begged, holding his hands out in a frantic, placating gesture. "The police are on their way right now. We are going to sort this out immediately. The catering team can just set up on the patio for now. We will make it a rustic outdoor evening." A rustic outdoor evening in a mud pit, one of the corporate partners muttered, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. I am not getting involved in a domestic police investigation, Tristan. I have a flight to Tokyo tomorrow morning, and I am not spending my evening answering questions about your missing furniture. The crowd murmured in strong agreement. The glowing screens of dozens of smartphones illuminated the dark porch as the wealthiest people in our neighborhood aggressively opened their ride-sharing applications. Tristan scrambled, grabbing the arm of a senior sales director. Wait, please do not leave, Tristan pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. This is just a massive misunderstanding. The party is not canceled. Let go of my jacket, Tristan, the director snapped, brushing his hand away with absolute disdain. You are a complete mess. I am calling an Uber Black and going home to my wife. Do not contact me on Monday. As the guests began filing rapidly down the driveway, eager to escape the humiliating spectacle, Lexi stomped back into the foyer. She looked absolutely feral. Her emerald green sequin gown was coated in thick, wet mud from the knees down, and her perfectly styled hair was a frizzy, tangled mess from the evening humidity. She marched right up to Tristan, pointing a trembling, mud-caked finger directly at his chest. You told me you were rich! Lexi screamed, her voice echoing shrilly against the bare drywall. You told me you owned this mansion. You told me Sydney was just a broke loser who arranged pillows for a living. Where is my house, Tristan? Where is the velvet sofa you promised me? Tristan flinched, taking a step back from her fury. Lexi, baby, please calm down, he stammered, raising his hands defensively. Sydney is insane. She stole everything while we were at the spa today. The police will arrest her tonight and we will get it all back. Just trust me. Trust you, Lexi shrieked, kicking her muddy heel against the hardwood floor. You do not even have a refrigerator for the catering team to store the sushi. You are a fraud, Tristan. You dragged me into this empty dirt pit and embarrassed me in front of all my friends. My live stream is completely ruined because of you. I bet you do not even have any money at all. Karen stood shivering by the open door, too horrified to intervene as the young mistress verbally decimated her golden child. But while Tristan and Lexi screamed at each other in the dark foyer, Jamal stepped quietly into the center of the cavernous living room. He pulled his smartphone out, turning on the flashlight, and aimed the bright beam directly at the single cheap plastic folding table I had left behind. Jamal approached the table, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. He noticed the sleek black leather presentation folder sitting perfectly aligned in the center. He opened the cover, illuminating the thick watermarked corporate documents inside. As a high-end property appraiser, Jamal knew exactly how to read complex real estate contracts. His eyes scanned the formal lease termination notice and the $17,500 damage invoice for the Persian silk rug. He read the name of the corporate entity that owned the blind trust. He read my signature at the bottom of the page, acting as the chief executive officer. Jamal lowered his phone, and a massive booming laugh erupted from his deep chest. The sheer joy in his laugh completely drowned out Lexi's shrill tantrum. It was the sound of a man who had finally seen justice served on a silver platter. Tristan snapped his head toward the living room, his face twisting with rage. What is so funny? Jamal, Tristan yelled, marching toward the table. My life is falling apart and you are laughing at me. Jamal picked up the folder and shoved it hard against Tristan's chest. I tried to warn you, man, Jamal said, a massive grin spreading across his face. I told you not to play games with corporate assets. Read the paperwork, Tristan. Sydney did not rob you. She legally evicted you. You are so unbelievably screwed. Tristan snatched the folder, grabbing his phone to shine a light on the documents. His eyes darted frantically across the legal jargon, his face draining of all color as the horrifying reality finally set in. He read the words blind trust and breach of contract. Before he could even formulate a single word of defense, the sharp, piercing wail of police sirens shattered the quiet suburban night. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively against the large bare windows, painting the empty house in chaotic strobe colors. Two heavy police cruisers pulled aggressively into the driveway, blocking the remaining guests from leaving. But right behind the police cars, a sleek black SUV glided smoothly up to the curb. The tinted driver's side door opened, and I stepped out onto the pavement flanked by my lead corporate attorney, a man wearing a very sharp, very expensive suit. Tristan's eyes widened in absolute shock as I stepped out of the vehicle flanked by my lead corporate attorney, a man wearing a very sharp, very expensive suit. For a split second, Tristan looked confused, but that confusion rapidly morphed into a manic, desperate kind of vindication. He practically shoved his way past a stunned police officer, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "Arrest her!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain of his own panic. "She is right there, officer. She is the one. My psychotic ex-wife just committed grand larceny. She broke into my house and stole over $400,000 worth of luxury furniture and high-end appliances. I want her in handcuffs right now." The two police officers stepped forward, holding their hands up in a universal gesture to calm down. The lead officer, a tall, burly man with a thick mustache, unclipped his radio. "Sir, take a deep breath and step back," he commanded firmly. "Nobody is getting handcuffed until we figure out exactly what is going on here." But Lexi was not about to let the police assess the situation rationally. She came sprinting out of the empty house, her ruined emerald green dress flapping around her muddy legs. She looked like a deranged swamp monster. She ran straight toward the officers, weeping hysterically and waving her arms. She took everything, Lexi wailed, pointing at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "She is a monster. She even took the closets. Who takes the closets?" I walked upstairs to change out of this muddy dress, and all of my custom-built mahogany wardrobe shelving was gone. My entire designer wardrobe is sitting in black plastic garbage bags on the bare floorboards. She treated my expensive clothes like actual trash. "You have to lock her up." Tristan stepped up beside Lexi, wrapping his arm around her muddy shoulder to present a united front of victimhood. "She is completely unhinged." Officer Tristan continued, adopting his most authoritative corporate executive voice. "I am the sole leaseholder of this $2 million estate. I pay the rent every single month. She got bitter about our divorce and hired a criminal crew to strip my home down to the drywall. This is a massive felony. I want her charged to the maximum extent of the law." I stood leaning comfortably against the sleek black exterior of my SUV, feeling the cool night air against my face. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers cast harsh shadows across the chaotic scene, but I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against their frantic accusations. I simply offered Tristan a cold, knowing smile. My silence infuriated him even more. "Look at her," he yelled, gesturing wildly. "She is not even denying it. She thinks this is a game. Cuff her." The lead officer turned his attention to me, his expression stern but professional. "Ma'am," he started, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. "Are you aware of the allegations these two individuals are making against you regarding the removal of property from this residence?" Before I could even open my mouth to confirm, my lead corporate attorney stepped smoothly in front of me. Mr. Mitchell was a man who billed $1,000 an hour, and he carried the quiet, lethal authority of someone who never lost a case. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, pulled a small flashlight from his pocket, and opened his thick leather briefcase, resting it on the hood of the police cruiser. "Good evening, officers," Mr. Mitchell said, his voice calm and incredibly measured. "My name is David Mitchell, and I am the lead legal counsel for the corporate entity that owns the assets in question. There has been no grand larceny tonight. There has been no theft whatsoever. My client is simply executing a standard corporate asset reclamation protocol due to a severe breach of contract." Tristan let out a loud, barking laugh. "Corporate asset reclamation," he mocked, shaking his head. "You are out of your mind. I rent this house. My name is on the lease. Mr. Mitchell ignored Tristan completely, focusing entirely on the police officers. He pulled a thick stack of watermarked documents from his briefcase. He handed the first packet to the lead officer. "These are the certified digital inventory logs and corporate tax returns for my client's luxury home staging company," he explained, pointing to the highlighted sections. "You will see that every single piece of furniture, every appliance, and every fixture removed from this property today is a registered corporate asset belonging exclusively to her company. The officer clicked his pen light on, scanning the detailed logs. Mr. Mitchell handed over a second set of documents. Furthermore, here is the official property deed and the registration paperwork for the blind trust that holds the title to this estate. He continued, his voice echoing clearly over the hum of the police engines. You will clearly see that my client is the sole beneficiary and absolute owner of this property. The individual screaming at you is simply a month-to-month tenant who pays the exact amount of the neighborhood association fees and property taxes. He does not own a single item that was removed today. Tristan stared at Mr. Mitchell, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked frantically at the officer, who was now carefully examining the legal documents with his flashlight. That is impossible. Tristan stammered, his voice losing all of its previous authority. I have a lease. I have a legally binding corporate lease. You cannot just come in and take the roof over my head. Actually, sir, we can. Mr. Mitchell countered smoothly, handing the officer one final piece of paper. This is a formal lease termination notice executing an immediate 0-day eviction clause. The tenant committed a documented financial theft of $40,000 from my client, which constitutes a direct violation of the lease terms regarding illegal activity on the premises. The lease is officially void. The lead officer spent 2 full minutes reading through the airtight legal paperwork. The silence in the driveway was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the police radio. Lexi had stopped crying, staring at the officer with wide, terrified eyes. Karen stood frozen by the front door, watching her son's entire world collapse in real time. Finally, the officer clicked his flashlight off and handed the thick stack of documents back to Mr. Mitchell. He let out a heavy sigh and slowly turned to face Tristan. His expression had shifted from professional neutrality to complete, utter exhaustion. Tristan swallowed hard, taking a small step back. Officer, you have to see this is a setup, he pleaded weakly. She fabricated all of this. The officer hooked his thumbs into his utility belt and shook his head. Sir, the paperwork is fully certified and legally binding, he stated, his voice carrying absolute finality. She did not steal anything tonight. She is the legal owner of this property, and every single item that was inside it. In fact, since your lease has been legally terminated due to breach of contract, you no longer have any right to be here. You are currently trespassing. The word trespassing hung in the damp night air like a physical blow. Tristan physically recoiled as if the police officer had struck him right in the chest. The remaining VIP guests, who were still huddled near the edge of the driveway waiting for their luxury rides, suddenly went completely silent. They were hanging on to every single word of the unfolding drama, their eyes darting between Tristan the police and my imposing corporate attorney. Mr. Mitchell, recognizing the perfect opportunity to completely dismantle Tristan's false narrative, turned slightly to face the crowd of wealthy onlookers. He did not yell, but he projected his voice with the polished, practiced cadence of a seasoned litigator, ensuring every single person present heard the absolute, undeniable truth. For the benefit of the guests who were invited here tonight, under completely false pretenses, let me clarify the situation, Mr. Mitchell announced, his voice ringing clear across the manicured lawn. The man standing before you, Tristan, is not, and has never been, the owner of this $2 million estate. He is a month-to-month renter who signed a highly subsidized corporate lease agreement. His monthly payments barely covered the basic neighborhood association dues and the annual property taxes. In fact, his entire executive lifestyle, from the custom Italian furniture to the smart appliances you expected to see tonight, was entirely subsidized by my client's luxury staging firm. He lived in a carefully constructed illusion funded by the very woman he just attempted to have arrested for grand larceny. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of corporate partners and socialites. Wealthy people despise nothing more than a fraud, and Tristan was just exposed as the ultimate imposter. Lexi covered her face with her muddy hands, letting out a muffled sob of pure mortification. She realized that every single viral video she had posted, every boastful claim she made to her friends about marrying into immense wealth was a massive, embarrassing lie. She had tied herself to a man who possessed absolutely nothing of his own. And to make matters worse, Mr. Mitchell continued adjusting his suit cuffs gleaming under the streetlights. Tristan recently stopped paying those bare minimum lease obligations. He unlawfully drained a joint financial account, stealing $40,000 to purchase a luxury vehicle for his mistress. Because of this egregious financial theft, the corporate trust immediately terminated his lease. He invited you all to a grand housewarming party at a property he no longer has any legal right to enter. The whispers among the crowd turned into loud, blatant scoffs of disgust. Tristan looked around wildly, watching the respect of his peers evaporate into the night air. He was completely stripped naked in front of the exact people he had spent years desperately trying to impress. His face flushed a deep crimson and his hands shook uncontrollably. Before Tristan could even attempt to formulate a pathetic excuse, a figure detached himself from the shadows near the street. It was Mr. Preston. The regional vice president had been waiting for his private driver to navigate the congested neighborhood streets, and he had heard every single word of Mr. Mitchell's damning proclamation. Mr. Preston walked slowly back up the driveway, his face set in a mask of absolute cold fury. The crowd parted respectfully to let the senior executive through. Tristan saw his boss approaching, and his knees practically buckled. "Richard, please," Tristan begged, holding his hands up in a desperate plea. "This is a private domestic matter. It has nothing to do with my performance at the firm. I can explain everything on Monday morning when we are back in the office." "There will be no Monday morning for you, Tristan," Mr. Preston said, his voice slicing through the night like a freshly sharpened blade. "I tolerate many things in my division, but I do not tolerate liars, thieves, or men who lack basic integrity. You built an entire career profile on a foundation of deceit. You stole money from your own wife to fund an affair, and then you had the absolute audacity to invite your professional colleagues to celebrate your fraudulent lifestyle." Mr. Preston paused, looking Tristan up and down with visceral revulsion, noting the sweat pouring down the younger man's face. "You do not have the judgment or the moral character required to lead a team. The regional director promotion is officially revoked. Furthermore, consider your employment with the firm terminated effective immediately. Security will box up your desk and mail your personal items to whatever budget apartment you manage to find next week. Do not ever contact me or anyone at the firm again." Tristan let out a choked, agonizing sound that was half gasp and half sob. His entire life, his marriage, his home, his wealth, and his career had been completely eradicated in less than 24 hours. He slumped his shoulders, looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had handed me divorce papers just days prior. Watching her golden child face total annihilation, Karen decided it was time to deploy her ultimate defense mechanism. She let out a loud theatrical gasp, placing the back of her hand against her forehead. Oh, the stress, she wailed, her voice wavering dramatically for the audience. "My heart cannot take this vicious cruelty. I am feeling completely faint." She intentionally let her knees buckle, expecting one of the wealthy guests or her son to rush forward and catch her before she hit the ground. Nobody moved. Karen collapsed awkwardly onto the damp brown dirt of the ruined front lawn, her heavy fur coat instantly soaking up the mud, just like Lexi's dress. She laid there with her eyes closed, waiting for the panicked rush of attention that usually followed her dramatic episodes. Instead, Jamal stepped forward, looking down at his mother-in-law with a wide, highly amused grin. He did not offer her a hand. "Cut the act," Karen Jamal said, his deep voice booming with laughter. "We all know you are faking it. Your heart is fine because you do not actually have one. Stand up before you ruin that expensive coat you bought with Tristan's stolen money." Karen's eyes snapped open, glaring at Jamal with pure venom, but she quickly scrambled to her feet, brushing the wet dirt from her clothes in absolute humiliation. She realized her manipulative tactics held zero power here, and the remaining crowd was actually laughing at her pathetic performance. The police officers watched the entire spectacle with crossed arms, completely unbothered by the family melodrama unfolding on the lawn. The lead officer turned back to Tristan, ready to officially order him off the premises so they could clear the scene. But before he could issue the verbal command, a bright, flashing amber light cut through the darkness of the suburban street. A white security golf cart sped recklessly up the avenue and screeched to a halt right behind my black SUV, tires squealing against the asphalt. A short, red-faced man holding a thick clipboard marched out of the cart, slamming the small door behind him. It was the president of the Homeowners Association, and he looked absolutely furious about the noise complaint. The short, red-faced man marching up the driveway was Arthur Pendleton, the notoriously strict president of the Oak Ridge Estate Homeowners Association. He was clutching a thick aluminum clipboard to his chest, and his face was flushed with a mixture of righteous indignation and breathless anger. He pushed his way past the remaining stragglers of Tristan's ruined VIP guest list, completely ignoring the flashing lights of the police cruisers. He marched directly up to Tristan, pointing a rigid finger at his chest. "Tristan, what is the meaning of this absolute circus?" Arthur demanded, his voice shrill and carrying across the quiet, manicured lawns of the neighborhood. "I have received 6 separate complaints from your neighbors in the last 20 minutes. You have stretch limousines blocking the emergency fire lanes. You have a commercial catering team setting up industrial equipment on a residential patio. And you have a massive crowd of unauthorized guests loitering on the street. This is a quiet, gated community, not a downtown nightclub." Arthur Tristan stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "Please, you have to understand. My ex-wife just robbed me. I am dealing with a police matter right now. I will clear the street in a minute." Arthur did not care about Tristan's domestic disputes. He flipped a page on his clipboard, clicking his pen with aggressive force. "According to Section 4, Paragraph B of our community bylaws, hosting a commercial-scale private event involving more than 30 non-residents requires a pre-approved permit and a security deposit," Arthur recited strictly. "You bypass the committee entirely. Furthermore, you are causing a massive public disturbance, which is a direct violation of Section 9. Arthur furiously scribbled on a pink carbon copy form, tore it from his clipboard, and slapped it directly onto Tristan's tuxedo chest. "This is a formal citation, Tristan. You are hereby fined $5,000 for unauthorized commercial event hosting and severe neighborhood disruption. The fine is payable within 14 days, or we will initiate legal action." Tristan stared at this pink slip of paper fluttering to the ground. $5,000. He gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Arthur, I do not have $5,000 right now. You cannot do this. I am a victim here." My lead corporate attorney, Mr. Mitchell, cleared his throat, stepping forward with a polite smile. "Just to clarify for the association records, Mr. Pendleton," Mr. Mitchell said, gesturing toward me, "the corporate trust that owns this property is not liable for any fines incurred by this unauthorized gathering. The financial penalty rests solely on the individual who organized the event. And since he is no longer a legal resident of this property as of tonight, you will have to forward any further correspondence to his future address." Arthur adjusted his glasses, looking from the attorney to the police officers. "Is this true?" Arthur asked. The lead police officer nodded, tapping the thick stack of legal documents he still held. "Yes, sir, it is true. The individual known as Tristan is no longer a tenant here. His lease has been officially voided due to a severe breach of contract involving financial theft. Which brings us to our next order of business." The officer turned his full imposing attention back to Tristan. The brief moment of distraction provided by the HOA president was over. Tristan, the officer, said, his tone dropping any remaining shred of polite patience. "The property owner has exercised her legal right to a 0-day eviction based on your criminal violation of the lease terms. We have verified her ownership and the termination documents. You have no legal right to remain on this property. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Tristan's jaw dropped. Immediately, he repeated, his eyes darting frantically around the empty dirt yard. "Officer, it is nighttime. I do not have a hotel booked. I do not even have my furniture. You have to give me at least 30 days. That is the law." 30 days. Not when you commit a documented felony theft against the leaseholder and the corporate trust, the officer countered, taking a step forward to emphasize his authority. "The 30-day grace period is voided when you steal $40,000 from the property owner. You are officially trespassing. I am giving you exactly 5 minutes to gather whatever personal belongings you still have on this property and walk away. If you are still standing on this driveway in 6 minutes, I will place you under arrest for criminal trespassing. Do you understand me?" Lexi let out a fresh wail of absolute despair. She realized there was no talking their way out of this. The illusion was dead. The wealthy lifestyle was completely gone. She turned and sprinted awkwardly in her muddy high heels into the dark hollow house. Tristan stood frozen, staring at the police officer in disbelief before finally turning and stumbling after her. The remaining VIP guests watched in stunned silence as the final act of Tristan's humiliation played out. Less than 4 minutes later, Tristan and Lexi emerged from the dark void of the empty mansion. It was a sight that would be burned into the memories of every single person present. Tristan was wearing his sharp, tailored tuxedo, now stained with sweat and dirt, dragging two massive black plastic garbage bags full of his cheap clothes across the hardwood floor. Behind him, Lexi was struggling to carry 3 more garbage bags. Because I had authorized my crew to rip out the custom mahogany closets, Lexi had been forced to scoop her expensive designer dresses and handbags directly off the bare floorboards and shove them into industrial trash bags like common refuse. They dragged the heavy plastic bags down the paved driveway, the thick plastic tearing and scraping loudly against the concrete. Lexi's emerald green sequin gown was ruined, her face streaked with mascara, tears, and mud. Tristan looked like a broken, defeated man, hauling his entire pathetic life over his shoulder. Jamal let out a sharp whistle of amusement, pulling his phone out to snap a quick photo of the magnificent downfall. Karen covered her face with her hands, unable to watch her golden child reduced to a literal garbage collector in front of the neighborhood. Tristan reached the bottom of the driveway, dumping the bags onto the curb. He looked up and saw me standing calmly beside my sleek black SUV. The sheer contrast between my calculated victory and his absolute ruin finally snapped whatever remaining shred of sanity he possessed. He dropped his bags and ran toward me, his eyes wide and manic. "Sydney, please," Tristan begged, slamming his hands flat against the hood of my vehicle. "You cannot do this. You cannot just leave me on the street like this. I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing left." "Sydney, look at me. Please, just let me back in. Let us talk about this. I am sorry. I will pay you back. I promise. Just give me one more chance." I did not flinch. I did not say a word. I simply offered him a cold, brief smile. I opened the door of my SUV and stepped inside, settling into the plush leather seat. I started the engine, the powerful motor purring smoothly in the night air. Tristan ran to the driver's side window, pressing his sweaty palms against the glass. "Sydney," he screamed, his voice muffled by the thick acoustic glass. I pressed the automatic window button. The dark-tinted glass slowly rolled up inch by inch, completely severing my connection to him. I put the car in drive smoothly, pulling away from the curb and leaving Tristan standing in the street, surrounded by garbage bags and flashing police lights, as I drove off into the night. 3 days had passed since I drove away from the hollow shell of my former home, leaving Tristan standing in the street, surrounded by garbage bags and flashing police lights. The harsh reality of his situation had finally caught up to him. He and Lexi were now crammed into a dingy budget motel room right off the interstate highway. The contrast between the $2 million estate and the peeling yellow wallpaper of room 112 was staggering. A leaky faucet dripped loudly in the cramped bathroom, and the overwhelming smell of stale cigarette smoke clung to everything. Their expensive designer clothes, still stuffed inside black plastic garbage bags, were piled haphazardly in the corner of the stained carpet. Lexi sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at her ruined emerald green sequin dress hanging over a plastic chair. She had spent the last 72 hours crying, screaming, and frantically scrolling through her phone, looking for any kind of financial lifeline. Tristan paced the narrow space between the bed and the cheap television, desperately making phone calls, trying to secure a new job or a quick personal loan. Every single call went straight to voicemail. His corporate network had completely blacklisted him after the spectacular public firing by Mr. Preston. Lexi finally snapped her phone shut and glared at Tristan with absolute disgust. "I am hungry," she announced, her voice devoid of any affection. "I want to go to that upscale bistro downtown, order an Uber and transfer some money to my account." Tristan stopped pacing and rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "Lexi, we cannot go to a bistro right now," he muttered, his voice exhausted. "I told you I'm dealing with a cash flow issue. We have to eat from the vending machine down the hall again tonight." "A cash flow issue?" Lexi shrieked, standing up from the bed. "You are completely broke, Tristan. I checked your tablet while you were in the shower. Your credit cards are maxed out from the limousine rental and the catering deposit for that disastrous party. Your checking account has less than $40 in it. You do not have a job. You do not have a house. You are a complete fraud. Tristan flinched, stepping toward her with his hands raised. Baby, please, just give me a week to sort this out. I am a talented executive. I will bounce back. We still have each other. Lexi let out a harsh, cruel laugh that echoed in the tiny room. We have each other, she mocked, rolling her eyes. I did not sign up to live in a roadside motel smelling like an ashtray. I signed up for a mansion and a luxury lifestyle. You lied to me from the very beginning. You are nothing without your ex-wife subsidizing your entire existence. She walked over to the cheap laminate dresser and grabbed the shiny new keys to the white Range Rover. Tristan panicked, lunging forward to grab her wrist. Where are you going? He demanded. You cannot take the car. I paid for that. That is my money. Lexi yanked her arm away, flashing him a wicked smile. Actually, Tristan, you put the title and the registration entirely in my name as a housewarming gift, remember? The car legally belongs to me. You stole the money from Sydney to buy it. You can explain that to the judge. Have a great life in room 112. She grabbed her purse, slammed the thin motel door behind her, and less than a minute later, Tristan heard the powerful engine of the luxury SUV roar to life and speed out of the parking lot. He was completely alone. Panic set in like a heavy weight on his chest. Lexi was gone, the car was gone, and he had absolutely nothing left. Desperate for a savior, he picked up his phone and dialed the one person who had always enabled his behavior and bailed him out of trouble. He called his mother. Karen answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was ice cold. What do you want, Tristan? She demanded, not even bothering to say hello. Mom, please. Tristan begged, his voice cracking with genuine fear. Lexi just walked out on me. I'm stuck in a cheap motel off the highway. I have no money for food and my credit cards are completely frozen. I need you to wire me a few $1,000s so I can get a decent apartment and hire a lawyer to fight Sydney. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Karen finally spoke, her words dripped with venomous resentment. Wire you money? She scoffed loudly. Are you completely out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you have done to my reputation? Mom, I am your son, Tristan pleaded. You are an embarrassment, Karen snapped, cutting him off aggressively. I had to face my entire country club committee yesterday. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows you were just a broke tenant, living in a house owned by that woman. Mr. Preston's wife told the entire neighborhood that you were fired for being a fraud. I have spent decades building a respectable image in this community, Tristan, and you destroyed it in a single night. But I need help, Tristan cried, sinking down onto the edge of the lumpy bed. I had to tell my friends that I cut you off financially years ago to save face. Karen continued, completely ignoring his distress. I told them your poor choices were your own and that our family does not support thieves. If I wire you a single dime and anyone finds out, I will be the laughingstock of the social season. You made your bed in the mud, Tristan. Now you get to lie in it. Do not call this number again until you have made something of yourself. The line went dead with a sharp click. Tristan stared at the blank screen of his phone, his mouth hanging open in shock. The mother who had always praised him as the golden child, who had constantly belittled me to elevate him, had just abandoned him to protect her country club status. He was utterly isolated. No wife, no mistress, no job, no home, and now no family. He sat in the silence of the dingy motel room, listening to the dripping faucet for what felt like hours. He was wallowing in his absolute misery when a loud, sharp knock on the thin wooden door made him jump. His heart leaped with a sudden surge of false hope. Maybe Lexi felt guilty and came back. Maybe Karen had a change of heart and sent a private driver to pick him up. He scrambled off the bed, smoothing his wrinkled shirt, and rushed to open the door. It was not Lexi, and it was not his mother. A tall man in a plain gray suit stood on the outdoor walkway holding a thick manila envelope. Tristan, you have been served, the man stated flatly, shoving the heavy envelope directly into Tristan's chest before turning and walking quickly down the exterior stairs. Tristan stumbled back into the room, tearing open the sealed flap with shaking hands. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with the official seal of the county family court. It was an emergency court summons for financial asset recovery and the malicious dissipation of marital assets. But what made Tristan's blood run completely cold was the official letterhead at the top of the summons. The law firm representing my interests demanding immediate restitution of the stolen $40,000 was none other than the premier property litigation firm downtown. The lead attorney assigned to brutally dismantle Tristan in court was Jamal. I sat across the polished mahogany table in the sunlit conference room of Jamal's downtown firm, watching my brother-in-law meticulously organize the financial documents. While my corporate attorney, Mr. Mitchell, handled the brutal eviction and the corporate trust defense, Jamal had eagerly stepped up to act as my lead legal representative in family court for the divorce settlement. Jamal possessed an absolutely lethal combination of skills. As a certified high-end property appraiser and a licensed financial asset recovery attorney, he knew exactly how to track hidden money and dismantle fraudulent claims. Jamal slid a thick stack of bank statements across the glass table, tapping his heavy gold pen against the highlighted transaction lines. "I had these subpoenaed yesterday morning," Jamal said, a wide, triumphant smile lighting up his face. "Look at the timestamp, Sydney. Tristan authorized the wire transfer of $40,000 from your joint savings account exactly 2 days before he handed you those divorce papers. And look where the money went: directly to a luxury automotive dealership to purchase a vehicle registered solely in the name of his 23-year-old mistress." I leaned forward, studying the glaring evidence of my ex-husband's sheer audacity. "He really thought he could just drain our life savings and call it his severance package," I murmured, shaking my head. "He told me I would spend more on legal fees trying to get it back than the actual money was worth." Jamal let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed in the quiet conference room. "Tristan is a textbook narcissist who gets all of his legal advice from television shows," Jamal stated, leaning back in his leather chair. "He is about to receive a very expensive education in a legal concept called the dissipation of marital assets." I raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of my sparkling water. "Explain it to me. I want to know exactly how we are going to bury him." Jamal leaned forward, his expression turning razor-sharp and entirely professional. "In family law, the dissipation of marital assets occurs when one spouse intentionally wastes, depletes, or spends marital funds in bad faith for non-marital purposes, right as the marriage is breaking down," Jamal explained clearly. "The courts look incredibly harshly on a spouse who drains a joint bank account to fund an extramarital affair. Tristan did not just buy himself a new car. He intentionally gifted $40,000 of marital property to a third-party paramour without your consent. Under the law, he is fully liable to reimburse you for every single penny he stole. We have the bank transfer receipts, the car dealership invoice, and Lexi's own viral videos bragging about the purchase," I added, tapping the screen of my tablet, where I had saved all the digital evidence. "The case is completely airtight." "It gets even better," Jamal said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He pulled a secondary file from his briefcase and flipped it open. "As part of the standard financial discovery process for the divorce, I ran a comprehensive credit check on all accounts tied to Tristan's social security number. You are not going to believe what this fool has been doing since you kicked him to the curb." I looked at the credit card statements and my jaw practically dropped. In the mere days since he had been legally evicted and fired from his job, Tristan had completely maxed out 3 separate credit cards. These were joint accounts that we had opened years ago, but that I had stopped using once my staging business took off. The transaction history was a pathetic, desperate timeline of a man refusing to accept his new reality. There were thousands of dollars charged at high-end designer boutiques, massive charges for imported floral arrangements, and bookings at luxury downtown hotels. "He is trying to buy Lexi back," I realized, staring at the staggering debt total. "He is completely broke, living in a budget motel, but he is swiping plastic to buy her designer bags, hoping she will return to him." "Exactly." Jamal nodded, tapping the massive total balance at the bottom of the page. "And here is the truly pathetic part of his strategy. Because you are technically still legally married until the judge signs the final decree, Tristan firmly believes that all of this fresh credit card debt is marital debt. His cheap lawyer probably told him that any liabilities incurred before the divorce is finalized will be split 50-50 between the two of you. He is panic spending because he thinks he can stick the wealthy CEO ex-wife with half the bill. He thinks you will be legally forced to pay off the bribes he is buying for his mistress. I felt a cold flash of anger quickly replaced by intense, calculated amusement. He really thinks he has found a loophole, I said softly. Jamal chuckled, closing the file with a satisfying slap. It is a massive trap of his own making, Jamal confirmed. He completely forgot that we have a hard, legally documented date of separation, which is the exact night the police escorted him off your property. Furthermore, none of these luxury purchases benefit the marital household. They are frivolous expenditures made in extreme bad faith. The judge is going to take one look at these statements and assign 100% of this crushing debt directly to Tristan. We are not going to say a single word to him about this until we are standing in front of the judge. Let him keep digging his own grave. The strategy was flawlessly brutal. Tristan was walking into the courtroom expecting a payout, but he was actually walking straight into a financial slaughterhouse. 2 weeks later, the morning of the final divorce hearing arrived. The sky was overcast, casting a cool gray light over the imposing stone columns of the county family courthouse. I walked up the wide concrete steps, wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, my heels clicking confidently against the pavement. Jamal walked right beside me, carrying his heavy leather briefcase, looking like a gladiator stepping into the arena. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and took our seats at the petitioner's table. A few minutes later, the heavy doors swung open again, and Tristan walked in. Despite living in a dingy motel and drowning in maxed-out credit card debt, he had managed to get his only remaining suit dry cleaned. He walked down the center aisle with his shoulders squared and his chin held high. His cheap discount lawyer trailed nervously behind him, carrying a thin manila folder. Tristan took his seat at the respondent's table across the aisle. He turned his head and looked directly at me. I expected to see a broken, desperate man. Instead, a highly arrogant, smug smile spread across his face. He actually looked victorious. He leaned back in his wooden chair, exuding a bizarre sense of absolute confidence. It took me a second to realize exactly why he was looking so pleased with himself. Tristan had completely misunderstood the corporate documents from the night of the eviction. He thought the blind trust was just a sneaky marital investment vehicle. He actually believed he was about to convince the family court judge to force the liquidation of the $2 million mansion and grant him half the proceeds. He thought he was walking out of this courtroom a millionaire. "All rise," the bailiff announced, as Judge Reynolds, a stern-looking man with decades of family law experience, walked into the courtroom and took his seat at the high mahogany bench. He adjusted his glasses, flipping open the thick case file sitting in front of him. Tristan sat up perfectly straight at his table, buttoning his suit jacket and projecting the false confidence of a man about to win the lottery. His discount attorney, a nervous-looking man named Mr. Evans, immediately stood up to address the court. "Your Honor." Mr. Evans began, his voice lacking the polished authority of Jamal, or Mr. Mitchell. "My client is requesting an equitable 50-50 split of all marital assets. The primary focus of this division is the marital residence, a luxury suburban estate currently valued at over $2 million. My client resided in this property for the entirety of the marriage and contributed regular monthly payments toward its upkeep. We are formally requesting that the court order the immediate liquidation of this asset and award my client his rightful $1 million share of the equity." Tristan crossed his arms over his chest, offering me a condescending smirk across the aisle. He genuinely believed that his monthly homeowners association payments had magically bought him half of my entire corporate empire. Judge Reynolds looked up from the file, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He looked at Mr. Evans and then looked over at Jamal, who was sitting calmly with his hands folded on the table. "Counselor," the judge said, addressing Jamal, "are you contesting the characterization of this real estate property as a marital asset?" "I am absolutely contesting it, Your Honor," Jamal replied, standing up smoothly. He picked up the thick bound legal folder containing the blind trust documentation and walked it up to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The property in question was never a marital asset. It is a commercial investment property owned entirely by an irrevocable corporate blind trust established by my client's luxury staging firm 2 years prior to the date of this marriage. I have provided the original corporate charter, the deed, and the legally binding lease agreement that the respondent signed acknowledging his status as a mere month-to-month tenant. Judge Reynolds opened the folder and began reading through the airtight legal paperwork. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Tristan's smug smile began to waver slightly as he watched the judge's eyes scan the documents. After 2 agonizing minutes, Judge Reynolds actually let out a dry, incredulous laugh. He closed the folder and looked directly at Tristan's attorney. "Mr. Evans, did you even bother to review the title history of this property before walking into my courtroom today?" The judge asked, his tone dripping with professional disappointment. "Your Honor, my client assured me that he was the primary provider and leaseholder." Mr. Evans stammered frantically, shuffling the thin stack of papers on his table. "Being a leaseholder simply means you are a renter, Mr. Evans," the judge stated sharply. "A tenant does not magically acquire equity in a multi-million-dollar estate just because he pays his rent on time. Furthermore, this trust was established before the marriage even took place, and corporate assets are completely shielded from family court division. The house is a premarital corporate asset. Your client gets absolutely zero equity from that property. The claim is entirely dismissed." Tristan leaped out of his chair, his face flushing a furious dark red. "That is not fair," he yelled, interrupting his own lawyer. "I paid the bills. I was the man of the house. She tricked me." Judge Reynolds slammed his open palm against the heavy wooden desk, the sharp crack echoing loudly in the room. "Sit down and remain silent, sir, or I will hold you in contempt of court." The judge commanded, his voice booming with authority. "You rented a house from a corporation. You do not own it. End of discussion." Tristan sank back into his chair, the color completely draining from his face, as his $1 million fantasy evaporated into thin air. But Jamal was not even close to being finished. Now it was time for the financial slaughterhouse. Jamal stood up again, pulling out the second stack of files. "Your Honor, now that the matter of the real estate is settled, we need to address the severe, malicious dissipation of marital assets committed by the respondent Jamal," stated, his voice ringing clearly across the room. He handed the bank statements and credit card bills to the bailiff. "Exactly 2 days prior to serving my client with divorce papers, the respondent intentionally drained their joint savings account, transferring $40,000 to a luxury car dealership. He used these marital funds to purchase a vehicle registered exclusively in the name of his 23-year-old mistress." Mr. Evans jumped up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your Honor, that money was earned primarily through my client's corporate salary. Furthermore, any debts incurred by my client on his joint credit cards over the past 3 weeks should be split equally, as the divorce decree has not yet been finalized." Jamal did not even need to argue. The judge looked at the credit card statements showing thousands of dollars spent at designer boutiques and luxury hotels, and his expression turned to pure, absolute disgust. "Are you seriously trying to argue that your client should be allowed to steal $40,000 in cash to buy his mistress a car, and then force his wife to pay off the credit card debt he accumulated trying to win that mistress back?" Judge Reynolds asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Mr. Evans swallowed hard, completely unable to formulate a defense. "Let me make the law extremely clear for you right now," the judge declared, leaning forward and glaring directly at Tristan. "Dissipation of assets in bad faith is a serious violation in this court. Because you deliberately drained marital funds to finance an extramarital affair right as the marriage was breaking down, you are fully liable for that theft. I am ordering you to repay the petitioner the full $40,000 in cash restitution immediately." Tristan let out a choked gasp, gripping the edge of the wooden table to keep his hands from shaking. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, raising his voice over Tristan's pathetic gasp. "Every single cent of the recent credit card debt you incurred over the past month was spent solely on your paramour. None of those purchases benefited the marital household. Therefore, 100% of that crushing debt is assigned strictly and entirely to you. Your ex-wife will not pay a single penny toward your infidelity." The crushing mathematical reality of the judge's ruling hit Tristan like a physical blow to the chest. He walked into the courtroom expecting to walk out a millionaire. Instead, he was leaving with zero equity. Zero assets, a massive $40,000 cash restitution judgment hanging over his head, and tens of thousands of dollars in high-interest credit card debt he could not possibly pay off. He had no job, no house, and no future. Tristan's legs gave out. He physically collapsed back into his heavy wooden chair, his mouth hanging open in absolute shock. He stared blankly at the floor, completely destroyed. He was legally and hopelessly bankrupt. Judge Reynolds quickly signed the final divorce decree, closing the thick file. "I am signing the final orders now," the judge announced, looking down at the broken man across the room. "We are adjourned." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with a loud, echoing crack. It was over. The sharp crack of the wooden gavel echoed in my ears as I stood up from the petitioner's table. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on my chest for the last 4 years instantly lifted, evaporating into the sterile courtroom air. I gathered my files, slipping them neatly into my leather portfolio, with a profound sense of closure. Jamal gave me a firm nod of approval, snapping his heavy briefcase shut. We pushed through the solid wooden double doors of the courtroom and walked out into the wide marble hallway. The air outside felt incredibly light and breathable. We made our way down the sweeping stone staircase and pushed through the front glass doors of the courthouse, stepping out into the cool, overcast morning. But my victory lap was momentarily interrupted. Waiting at the bottom of the concrete steps, clutching her heavy designer handbag like a protective shield, was Karen. She had not dared to step inside the actual courtroom to witness her golden child face his financial execution, but she had hovered outside like a vulture waiting to pick at the remains. When she saw me walking down the steps, her expression shifted instantly. The cold, aristocratic disdain she had always directed at me vanished entirely, replaced by a pathetic, trembling mask of manufactured grief. She rushed forward, reaching her hands out as if she wanted to pull me into a warm, motherly embrace. "Sydney, sweetie," Karen cried, her voice wavering perfectly on cue. "This has all been such a horrible tragedy, a massive misunderstanding that just escalated completely out of control. But we do not have to throw away everything we built. You are still the daughter I never had. We can put this ugly mess behind us and still be family." I stopped on the bottom step, looking down at the woman who had spent 4 years mocking my upbringing and praising my ex-husband for supposedly rescuing me from poverty. Before I could even formulate a response, Jamal stepped smoothly in front of me, physically blocking Karen from taking another step. He towered over her, his dark eyes blazing with absolute zero tolerance for her theatrical performance. "Save the cheap community theater act," Karen Jamal said, his deep voice cutting sharply through the damp morning air. "You do not want a daughter. You want a wealthy sponsor because your country club friends just found out your son is legally bankrupt." Karen gasped, taking a step back and clutching a hand to her pearl necklace. "Jamal, how dare you speak to me that way?" she sputtered. "I am your mother-in-law. I am just trying to heal this family." "You are a textbook narcissist," Jamal countered, stepping closer and forcing her to look him directly in the eye. "You spent your entire life enabling Tristan, inflating his fragile ego and convincing him he was completely untouchable. You taught him that people were just stepping stones to be used and discarded at his convenience. You treated Sydney like absolute garbage until you realized she was the one secretly funding your son's fake luxury lifestyle. You did not want to heal this family yesterday when Tristan was bragging about his $1 million estate, and you certainly do not want to heal it today. You just want access to Sydney's bank account so you can keep pretending you belong to high society." Karen's face flushed a deep, violent red. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Jamal had completely dismantled her false reality in broad daylight, leaving her exposed and humiliated on the courthouse steps. "You ruined your own son, Karen," Jamal stated coldly, turning away from her. "Now you get to watch him deal with the consequences. Stay away from Sydney." Just as Jamal finished his brutal takedown, the heavy glass doors of the courthouse pushed open again. Tristan stumbled out onto the concrete landing. He looked absolutely hollowed out. His shoulders slumped forward, and he dragged his cheap discount briefcase by his side like it weighed 100 pounds. He looked down the steps and saw me standing there with Jamal and his mother. He slowly walked down the steps, stopping just a few feet away from me. The arrogant, smug executive who had strutted into the courtroom less than an hour ago was completely gone. In his place was a defeated, broken man, staring down the barrel of a massive cash restitution judgment and crippling credit card debt. He looked at my tailored charcoal suit and my calm, unbothered expression, his eyes filled with a pathetic mixture of anger and desperate confusion. "How could you be so incredibly cold?" Sidney Tristan asked, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "We shared 4 years together. We shared a life. How could you completely destroy me and not even shed a single tear?" I looked at the man I had once pledged my life to. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, and certainly no regret. I thought about the day he handed me the divorce papers, demanding I leave the house my company owned. I thought about the way he smirked while Lexi admired my custom furniture and bragged about her new car. I adjusted the strap of my leather portfolio and looked him dead in the eye. "You told me to take everything that belonged to me, Tristan," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and icy. I simply followed instructions. Tristan's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of my words hit him like a physical strike. He realized in that exact moment that he had engineered his own complete destruction. He had handed me the shovel, and I had quietly buried him with it. He lowered his head, staring blankly at the concrete steps, completely unable to argue with his own arrogant logic. I turned my back on him. "Come on, Jamal," I said, feeling a genuine smile finally break across my face. "I have a company to run." We walked away, leaving Tristan and his mother standing in the cold shadow of the courthouse, permanently removed from my life. 6 months later, the air was warm and smelled faintly of expensive jasmine. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of a gorgeous, sprawling penthouse suite hovering 50 stories above the downtown skyline. The evening sun was just beginning to set, casting a brilliant golden hour glow across the city. The space around me was a masterpiece of modern design. Every velvet accent chair, every piece of contemporary canvas art, and every imported marble table was perfectly staged, reflecting absolute luxury.